Hello, everybody. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. We're going to wait another 30 seconds to let people join us, and then we'll start the conversation.
If for the people who are in the physical festival setting, how is it?
It's good. It's good. We'll talk about it as we go along in the conversation, if you don't mind. And for those people who are joining us, if you are want to participate in the conversation, feel free to use the chat or the Q&A to ask questions as we go along in the conversation at the bottom of your screen. I see people are still coming in, so we're going to wait a little more. Okay, Reynaldo, you can go ahead.
Well, welcome everybody. The 29th African Diaspora International Film Festival is on, and I must tell you that it's a pleasure to have you here. It is also a pleasure to have achieved 29 years of work with this type of content in the United States. I am Dr. Reynaldo Spech, co-director of the African Diaspora International Film Festival. African cinema, when we began 29 years ago, was not that frequently seen, at least in New York City. So the African Diaspora Film Festival started in New York City in a moment when there was a serious deficit in positive and diverse African images in the entire nation. We found that out later, and there's a festival in LA, and we are just some months apart. They are celebrating their 30th anniversary in February, and we are going to celebrate our 30th anniversary in November next year. But we are kind of the oldest, more or less. The scenario is different today. We can say that currently African films are screened and viewed almost everywhere in the nation. The African Diaspora International Film Festival is a contributor to this movement of images and ideas. The festival is held in New York City, Chicago, Washington, D.C., and Paris, France. The festival has an ongoing collaboration with Columbia University Teachers College, with monthly screenings of Afrocentric cinema that exposes people in the tri-state area to a large diversity of Afrocentric films. The appreciation of African films is a fact today that, to be honest, we didn't feel 29 years ago. We will talk about all that. We will talk about all the things. So welcome and thank you again.
Thank you, Dr. Spech. And my name is Diara Endal Spech. I am the other co-director for the African Diaspora Film Festival. Welcome again. And so we have a great panel. Thank you all for joining us. We have with us Olivier Assoua, who is the director of the Eagle Nest. Hello, Olivier.
Hi,
we have Bridget Pickering, who is the producer for I, Mary. Hi, Bridget.
Hi, hello.
We have Mutiganda Kunda, sorry, a director of Nameless. How do I say that?
Mutiganda
Gunda from for director for Nameless. Nunda. And we have Tim Hipschle, director of Land of the Brave film. And last but not least, we have Lerato Bokako, who is the African specialist for the African Diaspora International Film Festival, and who is going to lead this conversation. Welcome, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Diara. My name is Lerato. I am the outreach coordinator for the film festival. And before we get started, I just want to give everyone an opportunity to introduce themselves, tell us where you're from, where you're working from, and some of your accomplishments within the film industry. let's start with you, Olivier.
My name is Olivier, so I am a Cameroonian-born British filmmaker. I have been working in the film and television for over 13 years. I've tried to make a feature film before, and then I couldn't. And then after trying for so long, I then decided to go the indie way, what we call the guerrilla filmmaking way, trying to do it myself. So I've written a story, and then mostly it was at the back, it was at the end of the media on African immigration. So at the time before COVID, so I wanted to do something about it. I wanted to tell an African story from the African point of view. So I then decided to go home. That's in my country where I was born, to make the movie. So that's the story. That's how I end up being here today. And that is my story as a filmmaker.
Okay. Mutiganda, will you please introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you. My name is Mutiganda Wahunda. I'm a Rwandan filmmaker, and I started filmmaking as a journalist, as a film journalist and a critic in 2013, when I was after finishing my university studies in agriculture, because film has been my passion since I was a kid, and I started mixing journalism with television projects, TV series, popular TV series in my country, and then I switched back to filmmaking to make my own project, a feature film, and I shot it in 2017, and it actually premiered in 2021 after the post-production and COVID-19, and then it won award for best screenplay in Festival, and then I'm in post-production with my second feature film, Fiona, a Girl from Madrid.
Okay. Thank you. Bridget?
Hi, everyone. My name is Bridget Pickering, and I've been working primarily as a producer in the industry for over 25 years. I actually started my career in the United States. I went to university at Syracuse, and then went to work at Universal Pictures, where I was primarily doing casting, and then went back to Namibia. I'm partly Namibian. My mom's South African, my father's Namibian. So went back to Namibia, primarily producing documentaries and also some short films. And then moved to South Africa, where I've been working in the industry, primarily television, but also doing independent feature films. And most recently, I've kind of gone back to focusing on documentary, but also trying to get independent features and scripted television, which is sort of, I guess it's exploding at the moment in Southern Africa. The opportunities for scripted television has really become a sort of the focus for many filmmakers.
Yeah. Tim, will you please introduce yourself?
Hi, everybody. My name is Tim Hübschler. I started making films around 20 years ago, mostly documentary, but also short fiction. I like the storytelling aspect, essentially. So since I've been a teenager, that has been an interest of me. And I found the medium in which I could tell stories the best to be film. And hashtag Land of the Brave film, which is at the festival here, was my debut feature-length film. But recently I've returned now also more to documentary storytelling, and also focusing more on web content and trying to move with the times a little bit. If anything, the last year and a half has showed us that nothing is set in stone, and so we have to continue to redefine ourselves, and this is my attempt at doing it.
Mm. Well, it's really cool to have such a diverse group of African filmmakers. So I want us to talk about who are some of the African filmmakers who inspire you in your filmmaking?
That's just a general question to anyone. Okay.
Yes, to everyone. Anyone.
Well, I think for me, growing up, I didn't watch a lot of films, so I read a lot. So it was really African literature that inspired me.
Okay.
You know, Usman Sembène, Ngugi, who else? Now, of course, I've forgotten everyone. But yeah, so it was primarily stories, you know, reading. I loved reading as a child. So, and yeah, also storytelling. And then in a way, it just sort of evolved to wanting to then work in the film and television or the media industry. So it was a kind of a natural growth from really loving stories, both documentary and fiction, and then moving into wanting to kind of work in that space or to make films.
And it's interesting you say that you like, oh, sorry. Go on.
Yeah, go on, please, go
on. I was just going to say to Bridget that you were speaking about reading so much, and you've come to work in the documentary space, which is an interesting path to go from reading, you know, fiction and going to documentary. Wow. How would you say you came to be in the documentary space?
So when I started my career, when I came back to Namibia from the United States, Namibia had just become independent, and it kind of just made sense to tell real stories about real people because it was easier. That's where the money was. And I think just telling these really sort of authentic stories that are based on people's reality was there was an opportunity to do that immediately. And I always knew that I would go to fiction, that I would want to make, again, sort of scripted or fiction content. But at the time, documentary just seemed to be the avenue to get into. And I mean, now for me, I mean, like Tim, I kind of move between these two genres or the two forms of filmmaking, because I don't really, you know, for me, if there's a great story in documentary, then it's a great story. If there's a great story in scripted or fiction, it's a great story. So for me, I try not to limit myself. And it's very difficult as an African filmmaker to be strict about what you do and what you don't do. It's very difficult to specialize. But I love both forms, you know, I love both forms of storytelling. And the reason I kind of went back to it is, I was approached to make a particular film, which is around Mary, Regina Mary, the character in I, Mary. And so that kind of just propelled me to go back into that space. And I realized that I really love stories about real people. And so for me, I kind of move between the two, and I don't see it as a, you know, as kind of a difficulty or a disjuncture. I just kind of think, well, you know, this is a great story, let me do this. And, you know, so I move quite easily between the two.
Mutiganda, I think I cut you off, I'm sorry.
Oh, no, don't be sorry. That's okay. Because I was going to say that Bridget talked about Sembène Usman as an author. Bridget, did you speak about Sembène Usman as an author or as a filmmaker?
As an author.
Okay.
As
good,
mostly,
good,
as an author. I mean, I actually, I saw his films much later.
Yes, because I was going to talk about him as a filmmaker, because actually the question was, who is the African filmmaker who is your influence? But me as a person, I grew up maybe as another African young person or other African contemporary person. I grew up under the Hollywood films influence. And then later I found the real stories, the Italian neorealism, the Indian filmmakers like Cecilia Way, and it was very, very inaccessible to see the African films. And once I saw The Black Girl, the film by Osman Senden, I said, oh, yeah, this is a true Pan-Africanist. And then I said, I started to search about other African filmmakers like Itusawa Jago and Ned Hondo and Mambeti. And then I watched all of the Senden Osman films, and I found them. Actually, when I talk about Senden Osman, I said he might be part in every African story, because he along with Sankara, Lumumba, they are Pan-Africanists, they are African heroes as a filmmaker and as a Pan-Africanist. So that's when I started thinking about telling stories, my stories, and Dennis Mann is a very great influence. He has a very great influence on me, but not only as a filmmaker, but only also as a feminist, because the way he tells stories, his films, the way he crafts and he tells women's stories in his films, it's very, very super feminist. So that's what influenced me in my films.
I thought I'd seen Reynaldo's hand up. You wanted to say something? Oh, okay. Tim?
It was my hand, actually. I wanted to add on to what Bridget said about documentaries and documentaries form of storytelling, why it, for example, is so important in a place like Namibia, where we consist of 2.5 million people. We have a very small market. It also pertains to like the productions itself. Documentaries you can do with way smaller crews than you can, for example, fictional content. And the same way it enabled me at the outset, when I got into filmmaking, it was easier to access documentary projects than fictional projects, because the stakes are also high in terms of the story you tell and the responsibility you have towards your protagonists, who are actual people, and the places where you film are actual places. But there's not necessarily these massive budgets attached to it, which require you to have a lot of experience and a long track record. With documentaries, it's almost a more democratic way of storytelling. It's more accessible to you as a young person than fictional content, for example, is. And that's what I've always appreciated about it. It was more accessible. And you still get to tell a story in the process, and you still get to hone your skills as a filmmaker and as a storyteller in the process.
Oh, speaking of how you came to be, how you came into the film industry within Namibia, can you please talk to us about what is the film industry like in Namibia? And everyone is open to this question. How would you describe the film industry within your respective countries?
Okay, so in Namibia, it's relatively small, right? Like I mentioned, small population, small market. We do over the last, and I mean, Bridget might be interesting to talk about the beginning of the industry, because obviously when she was working here, it was way smaller than it is now. By now we are making feature films, not regularly. So it's like there's always certain periods when there's a lot of content that's created, and then there's like a stretch where not so much is created. And obviously recently that was also because of the pandemic. But generally, most of it is focused in Windhoek, our capital city. Then we do have a bit of an industry which is at a coastal city, where a lot of foreign productions come to shoot TV productions, or also elements or parts of feature films like Mad Max Fury Road, quite a chunk of it was shot in the west of Namibia. But generally, we are smaller outfits and we try and work together, but obviously everybody has to make a living. And I think we're still trying to figure out how to be sustainable about it, because our own market is very tricky in that regard. So we actually have to think more regionally. We have to try and get our content onto platforms like Showmax, which is a VOD platform in Africa, to actually try and reach a bigger audience. Because if we entirely rely on our own audience within our own country, that's not necessarily sustainable.
Okay, I will just join. I will start by just answering the first questions, who inspired me. I guess I will talk for mostly French-speaking countries because it's a different approach than the English-speaking countries. I think we have benefit from a lot of support from countries like France. That's the reason that the festival, like the FESPACO, they receive a lot of money and support to try to, especially what's mostly about towards training, allow a generation of filmmakers to try to tell their own stories, because that has always been the problem with Africa, how African can then tell their stories. But because the money also comes from somewhere, so we always have that Western gaze on the style of movie that is made. That's the reason why maybe a movie like mine is necessary to be made, because when you're an independent filmmaker, you can tell the story without having to be told how you have to tell it, because then you haven't taken anybody else's money. So you have that freedom of be able to create a story that you believe is true. In the end of the day, we're trying to tell a story, we're trying to present a different view. We're trying to create a diverse of ideas. I guess that's Africa. We try to see different people with different ideas that try to promote it. So when I was a child, because at the time, the poverty was not as strong as today, we were really open to watch Western films. For example, I grew up watching the French New Wave. Now I'm in my early 40s. So at the time, it was the type of movie that we used to watch. So by the time before I left Cameroon, they have some filmmakers like Basek Bakobio. He made a very incredible. I'm still moved by what he did. He's one of the people who actually inspired me to make movies. So I went to Europe. I went to a film school in Europe. I've studied in Europe. I come to the UK. That is a French, English-speaking country. For me, it's really difficult. I have to adapt to the language. I have to adapt to the people I meet there. So I meet a lot of British, African, that meet Black African filmmakers. We create that bond, and then I realize that we are so much alike in terms of what we want from the continent. We want a good Africa. We want a better Africa. We want to present better stories. But it's always hard to take this type of stories that we call as an independent filmmaker, bring the story towards just say maybe to be a fighter, receive fundings. It's a difficult process. So what you end up doing is like, okay, I have to do it myself. I have to believe in the story. I have to believe in the training I received. I have to believe in this little network of friends I've created to be able to tell the story. That's how I think that's how my story was told. And everybody I'm working with today is trying to do the same thing, just trying to be able to tell a story, believe in what he's doing. And also I also wanted to say, when I was in Africa as a 19-year-old, as 18 is different from what we see today. I think poverty became a little bit more than at the time when I was younger, meaning that the opportunity for young people today doesn't exist. So as a filmmaker, the only thing I could do as a storyteller was to be able to tell that story, tell that the young people live in a situation where they are trapped. So we have to find a way. We live in Europe. We have the possibility to generate some kind of income to be able to help them, because if we don't do that, nobody else will. So I guess today as a filmmaker, I think that's a position I believe as an African filmmaker living outside of the continent. I think that's the attitude I want to have.
Mm. And how would you describe the film industry in Cameroon?
I mean, like in Cameroon, we have an appetite for movies. I think everybody have realized that it's an opportunity to have a career, to make money. Most of African countries, the government is the biggest employer, meaning people, if you don't have a job in the government, you I mean, you don't have a future. So what this offers is like, if you have talent, you can create opportunity for yourself. So what happens is that a lot of young people now are trying to tell stories, but what is lacking right now, they have the enthusiasm, but they need to know, they don't have the know-how yet. So what I hope will happen with time is that by keep making movies, they will learn, but also we have people that will, if they can explore the possibility of co-production, like maybe team and working with a different production, like by learning how other people work is always beautiful because there's always something to learn there and something to bring to us. So right now, I'm in Africa. Cameroon's got like 2 or 4 movies on Netflix. Most movies are English-speaking movies. There's a reason why. So all the French-speaking movies have a very traditional world distributions that they will be supported by the French corporation, Canal Plus and Orange. They already have a path for them. But unfortunately, the world is bigger than that French-speaking market. It will be, I think it's a mistake to keep you can still sell to that market, but tell stories that can be sold to everybody else. So that's what I've tried to do. I didn't say I succeeded. That was the idea. That was to say, okay, it's possible to do. It's possible to make a movie in France, but not only for the French-speaking audience. That's how I was trying to do.
Okay. Reynaldo?
I would like to say this. In the festival this year, we had a professor from Uganda who teaches here, John Jay College, and he wrote a book. The title of the book is How the West Demonized Africa. And I remember when we began the film festival, that was something that we had in mind, that many of the images that have been conveyed about Africa, at least in this country, were not really the images we Black people wanted to see. And I think the aim should remain that of trying to convey images of Africa that are authentic and realistic about many things, but not with the intention of demonizing Africans. I think the intention should be that of humanizing Africans, because in this part of the world, they have played a very good role in dehumanizing Africans in general and Black people in particular. All over, I mean, this is one of the things, and I know from experience that the French establishment tends to control the imagination of African filmmakers. I interacted with different, African filmmakers. We have attended FESPACO. As a matter of fact, Diara was a jury in FESPACO, I don't know in what year, I don't remember the year. And we realized that the aim of conveying images of Africa that are true to Africa, true to Africans, is not really part of the aim of Europeans in general and those structures in particular. How are you going to do that? I take as an example, the festival. We are very independent. We are not a corporate event. So that has helped us bring certain films that other film festivals wouldn't play. Why? Because maybe the sponsor would be a little bit upset if their country is represented in a certain manner. One film that we have in that situation is Congo White King Red Robber Black Death, a Belgian film about what King Leopold II did in Congo. The film was moving around, nobody wanted to show it. And then when we brought it into this country, we played very limited. We had limited occasions to play the film because they didn't want to move this film around. And we have other examples, but this is, I think, is the dilemma that I see today for African cinema. What kind of African cinema are we going to put out there? With money or without money? What is it that we have in our heart that is going to push you to humanize the dehumanized? That's all I wanted to say.
I can just add something. If we, I don't know, it's just like since I made my movie, I've been doing a lot of thinking. To make movie, you need money. that is true. You need money. Somebody need to get money somewhere. And if you want to make a movie, you have to make a movie and make money out of the movie to be able to make a next movie. And then because in some of the countries, like maybe Cameroon or French-speaking country, they really go for the arts movie. It's a French way of making movie. French make beautiful stories. There's very art movie. There are no commercials movie. It's not a movie that maybe if you see a Nigerian movie, maybe on Netflix, you see, oh, man, how this movie is on Netflix? Because the story is appealing, because young women want to get married. And this type of story actually is sellable because it can touch everybody around the world. But now coming to the way when I had a conversation with my father about how he views Africa, and it's really different for the way I view Africa today. We have to be able to change the narrative. We have to be us today, not tomorrow, not the next generation. I think you have to be able to put tangible actions today to change the narrative. That's what I wanted to do with my movie anyway. I want to do the reason, it's not the quantity of movie that we have to do. Of course, there's a market, people need to earn a living, they will make movies. It's not about the quality, because it's going to be, okay, is it African movie or European movie? That's why we're trying to see the quality. Does it look like a European movie? I think what we think is about how we are true to the story we tell, how much of ourselves is put to the story. So how much our own experience as individuals have we put into the story? Therefore, it represents us honestly. I think that's where I think by the time we try to tell a type of story, with time, I've seen this movie, I've seen Timo's movie, it's a great movie. We can tell the guy it's a great storyteller. How do you get those type of guys to do the movie of tomorrow? How do we cooperate with them to make sure that the story we make today can also compete in biggest festival everywhere, to the manner on which that most of the children who are born here, who are Black, who are struggling for idea of identity, can tell his white friend and say, let's go and see a movie from Africa. That's why I hope it happen.
Mutiganda, did you have your hand up?
Talking about my country, let me go back some years. I think we all know the tragedy of 1994, the genocide against Tutsis. And actually, that's when our country started to get the international spotlight. And then Hollywood came in our country to tell our stories. There are many stories, many films which were made by Hollywood studios, like sometimes in April with Idris Elba and other many films. And then from that time, from 1996 until sometime I don't remember, there's no one that has ever made a film about our own stories. Let me echo Ronaldo's words, how when he quoted the words from the title of the book, how the Western demonized Africa. So that's when Rwandan filmmakers started to emerge, and actually in 2011, that's when the first Rwandan has made a feature film. As a director, that's our first feature film as a Rwandan filmmaker. That's Kivu Ruhorahoza. He made his first feature film in 2011. It premiered in Tribeca. The film is called Grey Matter. So that's our first feature film in Rwanda. So since that time, everyone woke up and everybody started to say, okay, this is possible if a Rwandan can shoot his own feature film independently without any help, because I define the contemporary Rwandan cinema as an independent cinema, because we don't any financial backup from our government or any other institution or any other external funding. So that's where the Rwandan contemporary cinema came from. And now we are somehow as a family or a community of filmmakers trying to tell their stories. That's where Nameless came from. We shot Nameless with our own limited knowledge about cinema at large. Academically, we didn't know anything about cinema, and we shot the film, which as much as any other film which was made here. So we are trying to tell our stories with any independent means necessary. That's where our Rwandan cinema is.
I'm going to try and switch gears just a little bit and start talking about your individual films. Let's start with Bridget. Can you please tell us about how you came to meet Aleki, the director of I, Mary, and when did you decide to start working on the project?
So this film had a very unusual beginning, in the sense that it started off as a television film. It was we made it for China Global Television, which is a strand. It's on our DSTV or digital on Mnet, so it's a cable a channel that screens that screens content about Africa, but it's based in Nairobi. And I mean, that's also a really interesting situation where you have the Chinese government being willing to invest in African content, and which there's a strand called Faces of Africa. And so my previous company had a slate of films that they produced for Faces of Africa. And so I pitched this idea of this character because I had been working with Aleki on another project, which fell apart. And then we decided to pitch this particular project. And when we were shooting it actually 10 days before the first lockdown. And we finished, in fact, a day or two before the lockdown actually happened. But because the material was so rich and amazing, at the time we were shooting, I kind of felt that it could be a feature film. And we wanted to really be able to make it a much more experimental and poetic film. So we basically went back to China Global Television, who owned the footage because they paid for it, and asked them if we could turn it into a feature-length documentary. And they agreed, and so we were able to shoot more material in the periods between lockdowns. And then we were able to then recut the film in the way that we felt gave much more kind of emotional, just a kind of more emotional story, and was able to give more space to the film. So that's how that film got made.
So can you talk to us then about what it was like to shoot at the beginning of the pandemic when things were still unclear? I mean, they kind of still are, but at least we know a bit more than we did back then. So what was that process like, shooting under those kinds of conditions?
Well, because we were shooting in the days just as the pandemic was starting. So very few people, no one knew kind of what was going on. And because it's a documentary, it was a very small shoot. We had 5 crew members, and then the main character, and primarily shooting with her in and around Johannesburg, and then shooting at her home. So we kind of were aware of the pandemic, and obviously we're taking certain precautions like the sanitizer and all of that. But the actual consequence of what was going on and what would happen hadn't really manifested. So I think it was still very much a lot of anxiety or questions, but not really knowing the full extent of what this would be. And then when we shot the second part of the film, by then, obviously, this was kind of 6 months later. And then, yeah, so I think the main thing was just kind of, I think the kind of insecurity and anxiety about what this was, you know. I think that was the biggest fear for us, is that we were dealing with something no one knew what was really going on, what were the consequences. But Regina Mary, who has albinism, I think has gone through so much in her own life that for her, she felt like this was one more problem, one more challenge that she could, you know, face. So she dealt with it, and I think we all dealt with it with some level of humor, you know, with some level of humor, because I think we weren't really aware of what was going to happen.
Mm. And then gender-based violence is a very serious and troublesome issue here in South Africa. Can you please talk to us about what it was in particular about Regina Mary's story that felt that it was so important to tell?
Well, I think her story is very much this intersection between gender-based violence and albinism. So she's someone who has experienced gender-based violence from a very young age and repeatedly over her life. But she's also someone who has overcome and transcended, you know, that experience. So yeah, so I think I think to have someone who could talk about that experience as someone with albinism, because I think the problems that people with albinism face are enormous, from, you know, murder, mutilation, you know, rape, you know, just like there's such an extreme level of consequences that they face, on the extreme of what it is to be someone who has albinism. But obviously, because she's a woman, she's a young girl, she, right from an early age, she was also experiencing sexual abuse and sexual assault. So it just felt like it was a really important story to tell. And also because she's such an incredibly powerful character. She's someone who's transcended. She's someone who's, you know, she's a motivational speaker. She's created her own content and a YouTube channel with her own content and done it completely on, you know, on her own. She's someone who's incredibly bright and clever. So she's able to really, in a way, kind of assess what happened to her, you know, so she's able to really talk about it in a way that is really evolved, and yet doesn't take away from the incredible pain and trauma that she did experience. So it's just a really powerful story that operates on many, many different levels of culture, of the personal, of of just the kind of all the kind of ideas that exist about people with albinism. You know, it was also an opportunity to address all of that, because it's not just South Africa, but all over the continent, in many countries where people with albinism face incredible abuse. So yeah, it's a story that operates on many different levels.
Yeah. And how did you meet her? How did you meet Regina Mary?
Aliki had met her before, because we were going to use her on another film, the film that fell apart. We were going to use her in that film. And when that film fell apart, we realized that her story is a story that could exist on its own. It was powerful enough, and there was enough story that we could make in fact, a 2-part documentary project.
Okay. Olivier, I really enjoyed the way that you told your story in a non-linear way. Can you talk to us about why you decided to go this route and talk about your writing process?
Okay. I wanted to, okay, it has always been dream of mine to use the structure to tell the story. I am a big fan of the Nolan, so I study here in the UK. This is it was one of the course study, and then you learn the way to write and you follow the career. You follow how they make the first movie, and then I think my journey as well, a bit like them, because you have to, as I really feel for the African young filmmakers, because they really don't have a model to follow. Most of the elders that went before us, they had a lot of money that was part of the French government to them, or the government to them back then, so they could make big budget movie. So the system of how the indie filmmaking actually happens in the English-speaking countries, like in the UK, you have a lot of independent filmmakers that go out and just do their movies. So here I was in a good setting to see how it's done and learn how I can then try to do the same thing. So in my case, I wanted to talk about the issue of immigration. I wanted to let people know that the issue is not really about the number of people dying. It's painful to know. The issue is about the policies, the failed policies that the European Union and the leader that in Africa keep making every year. That's the reason why poverty, and that's why the reason why it never stops. It doesn't stop because the policies are not correct. So I want to take a movie to tell people that, you know what, stop looking at the news. This is actually what happened. So I try to tell a story about two young girls that live in a country where they cannot really escape. There's so much poverty that the dream of living is the only way out, even though it's not even possible when the opportunity arises. So what I did is I collected a lot of information and then I put it in a linear way. But now I wanted to tell the story to make it interesting too. Like I said, the audience I have in mind was not just Cameroon or Africa. My audience was for people, like I said, my friend here, my friend is German, no, the one is Hungarian, and they participate into the writing process. So they were the one giving me feedback on a story that would have been made in Africa. So that's how the story was told. I approach it as a story, not really as an African story, as a human story. That's what I was trying to do.
Mm. And you have 4 credits in the film: director, writer, producer, editor. What was it like juggling all these roles and when making the film?
I hope I won't do that again. And that's what really happened when you live in the UK. This is a craftsmanship country. You learn how to do everything yourself. Throughout the 15 years of my career, I've been behind the camera, I've been a producer, I've been an editor for 10 years. So I've done a lot of what I end up doing a project. And because I work in medium-sized companies, meaning that when a project comes to you, like a promo, you approach it as a film. It's not really different because you write a script, you have to cast the actor, and then you have to cut it, you have to make sure the client is happy, that will be the audience. So it's not really different. So what I needed to do was just make sure that I have every single shot storyboarded. That was the only way out. The reason why I went to Africa not knowing much. So in the actress I have, they don't know much what they were doing. The main actress didn't know much about acting because that is her first film. So I did not have enough time. I have 3 months to get the cast, the crew, to shoot the movie and to come back to the UK and use the whole year to cut it. So I didn't have enough time to waste. So what I do is what I do every day. So I just try to scale it up. So meaning that I've came with short clips of different movies and trying to tell them what I was told as well, and what I've learned throughout the years. This is what I want. And mostly, the most importantly, they have to understand the character journey, what the character really want. Every single scene became like a workshop. I have to tell them, this is the direction I want to go, but this is the direction that your character want to go. And this is why your character want other people to believe. After a lot of festivals, when people ask me why the main character doesn't show empathies or she doesn't cry, maybe I felt it, but my point was that because I wanted to present to the audience that in this world, so much happened to them, they don't even have time to show, to cry anymore. Because now they have accepted the faith, they have accepted that everything is happening to them is normal. And that is true for many things, in many cases in Africa. We have accepted that the poverty in which we live is okay. So that's what I wanted to portray. That's what I was hoping to make I remember when I sent the draft to some people around us, and they said, do not underestimate the audience. Like I said, I've made this movie not for the African audience only, for the European audience that is more educated on how movies are complicated. So I just wanted to make it simple.
Mutiganda, I know that Nameless is your directorial debut of first feature film, and you also tackle the issues of poverty in your film. Tell me why you decided to go with that kind of theme for your first feature.
Actually, this was not meant to be my first feature film. Since 2016, I was writing. My first feature film is called Rockabye. I'm still writing, and it's now in the development stage. And one day, actually, I remember the exact date, and on August 16, 2017, I was watching this feature film by Ken Loach, the British filmmaker, Ken Loach. It's called Kathy Comes Home. It is a 1966 BBC TV play by Ken Loach. And then I was caught by it. It was not my first time to watch it, but that time I was like, in Kigali, there are people, we are like this. There are people like this, who are struggling to find where they can live and what they can even eat. So that was the starting point. And actually, after watching the film, I remember the story of my high school colleague who, in 2011, killed his wife over a fight over 5,000 francs. It's like $5 US. So he killed his wife. At that time, he was my high school colleague. So that when I heard that story that my high school colleague had killed his wife, it's a story I struggled long enough to understand and to take in. So when I watched that Ken Loach film, That He Comes Home, I came to realize that's a very, very, very realistic story. That's a very realistic act that can happen at any time. So I started to think, and at that moment I snapped and I was like, I'm going to tell this story right now, because this is my story. This is actually the story of young people here in Kigali who are struggling to make ends meet, me included at that time. So I started to write this story from that point, from that moment. And I started to generalize the story because I didn't want to lock the story on one person or inside my head. I started to generalize story about young people in Kigali and especially young couples. And then I came up with Nameless, and I wanted to make this film as very independent as possible, shooting with our own limited manners, funds, money, and knowledge, because we have never made a feature film before. I myself and my team, because I have the team, which the collaborators, the cinematographer, the sound, the actors, they have never acted in a feature film before. And so I started to meet them and explain them their characters, because I didn't want to write a screenplay, because I thought, because I like to work in the boundaries of social realism, and social realism is something which is real. And when you start to write something which is a personal or a screenplay or professional, I don't know how people call it, it comes something artistic on your own personal level. So I wanted to tell the story as realistic as possible, and then I started to explain the characters to their own actors, and then I told them, go make your research. And then we went on set, and also I wanted to make it my own birthday gift because my birthday is on October 18th. So we
Okay.
shot the film on October 18th. We started shooting on October 18th exactly because I wanted to. I said I want to shoot my first feature film on my 28th birthday. So went on set. We shot the film in 9 days, and I didn't have any connection or any money to finish the film or any festival connection. Actually, I didn't have any industry connection because I have been working on a TV series which were broadcasting nationally on Rwandan television, and I have made some short films which have been in some festivals, but um, I've never had any project, feature film project in any development uh, workshop, which is actually a designated way of starting a career as a filmmaker here in Africa, in contemporary Africa, which I oppose.
Mm.
So I started the journey to teach the rough cut to any person I ever knew. Olivier, if I knew you, I'll send you the rough cut right away. Anyone. So luckily, a year after, in 2018, I sent a rough cut to Carthage Film Festival in Tunisia. They have this post-production workshop which is called Takmir, and then they took it. They took the rough cut, and then we went there to pitch with my producer, and then one of the judges in Takmir loved the rough cut, and then came on board to co-produce the film, and then that's where we started the post-production. We found the money, we started the round of festivals and such, and yeah, that's the journey actually.
Okay. The next question I'll direct it towards Tim. I wanted to ask you about your main character, who is an anti-hero, and I think we've seen a trend of a lot more films and TV who are centering female anti-heroes as their protagonists. Tell me why you made this choice, and why do you think that is that more and more people are trying to tell these kinds of stories?
Okay, I think in the case of hashtag Land of the Brave film, was for me very clear from the word go that the protagonist had to be somebody who's real, who I would bump into when I go to the supermarket and stand in the queue and pay for my groceries. So I didn't want to now have like a model looking like total beauty to perform the role of Macy Williamson. It needed to be somebody gritty, somebody down to earth and not sexualized at all, because she navigates a world that is marred by gender-based violence and by prostitution. So that wasn't the point of having her now stand out differently. And because she deals with the ghosts of her own past that date back to pre-independent Namibia and has a lot of unresolved issues, that's the kind of stuff that starts actually showing outward. If you don't deal with stuff that you had done in the past, or you have transgressions, eventually it's gonna start showing signs on you. So that Elise, who's our actress in the film, I had her in mind very early on from the first draft of the feature, of the screenplay onwards, actually. And so it was about finding how to actually work together with her. I mean, because she no longer is a full-time actress. She's actually a social worker that specifically deals even with victims of gender-based violence on top of it in her day-to-day life, you know. So that was something that she could bring to the role on top of it. And for your general question, I think concerning anti-heroes, I think audiences the world over are more interested. We had the superhero era, you know, where we were all following the Marvels and all these aspects. But now I think we're leaning more to finding actually stories with people that are us, that we can see on the street, like I said, bump into the supermarket, deal with real stories that, and maybe find answers in there for issues that we don't know how to deal with, but still at the same time be an entertaining movie. And that's why I chose the thriller genre. You know, I still wanted people to sit on the edge of their seat, eat popcorn while they think about these more serious things.
Mm. And can you please talk to us about why you named the film #Land of the Brave film with the hashtag?
So it took me quite a few years to actually finally get to make this film. So it started off as a transmedia project where we didn't now have financial resources to shoot a teaser or to create any promotional material. So we used social media at that time to our advantage. And initially, I actually wanted to just call it #Land of the Brave. But when I researched the hashtag, that one was loaded with loads of NRA posts for some reason, National Rifle Association. I'm like, okay, I can't do that because that's going to confuse people. And then I just added the word film to it. And for about 6 years, we kept on posting backstories. So I had a lot of location photos that I took with my cell phone, or short, tiny video clips that would provide a backstory about a character or about a prop. And that sort of created more and more sort of awareness about the project until we finally managed to secure the production funding. So it was just to keep the story alive for me on the one hand, you know, that I keep on pushing. And the interesting thing in the writing process, some of these social media posts that I created actually informed later drafts of the screenplay itself. So there were little blurbs that just gave some insight about why a character, why the armed robbery happened, why the gun, that specific pellet gun was involved. Where did that pellet gun come from? And then I'm like, okay, maybe that little aspect I can actually also include into the actual movie. But it was literally, that's why it's such a mouthful of a title, and I'll never ever name a movie again that long, a hashtag. And Land of the Brave itself, just to round that off, that's what Namibia refers to as itself. So the second line of our national anthem, Namibia, Land of the Brave. So it was supposed to be also an homage to the country itself, and above all, the people that live here and call this place their home.
May I say something, Lerato?
Sure.
There's a question that was asked a little bit earlier to all the filmmakers. Can the panelists address the overview of where African filmmaking today is, where quantity, quality? Anyone?
Well, it's on Netflix. That's one thing.
It's a huge question and a very important one, especially, I mean, both quantity, because I think quantity speaks to diversity. You know, I think one of the problems with representation of Africa is there's an assumption there's one Africa. So, you know, and for me, I just think the idea of producing a lot of different films with different filmmakers, different points of view, is really kind of what we where we should be trying to get to, because I think and I think this idea of what is an African film is one that completely confounds so many different people, including myself. So there was a kind of African film, which was, I think, very the West African filmmakers, because of French influence, created a particular kind of film. I think in South Africa, we have completely, I think there's so many different films, very much, I think, influenced by American filmmaking. So very genre or kind of veering towards a very commercial kind of storytelling. So is there an African new wave? Is there a new way of seeing ourselves and rethinking? I'm not seeing it yet. I'm sure there might be interesting work out there that I cannot claim to have seen everything. I certainly haven't seen any of the films of the filmmakers, which is the other problem, is that we don't get to see any of each other's work, you know? So how can we be influenced? How can we collaborate? How can we share? How can we connect and understand each other if we don't even have access to see each other's work? It's the most challenging part, I think, of this continent, is the lack of distribution which services the people in the continent. It's not even, you know, it's not even, are we making these films for a global audience? Is can we ourselves see the films that other filmmakers on this continent are making? And that's a challenge that we haven't even addressed yet. And then quality, I just think, I think there's definitely technical quality has improved. I mean, I'm talking very much as someone working in South Africa. The technical quality is fantastic. It's really great. But I think for me, it is the idea of style, of point of view, of finding a way of telling stories which feels more rooted in who we are. And I haven't seen that yet. I think that's still a part of filmmaking, or that's a kind of a journey we are still, I think we need to go on. Yeah, so that's kind of my feeling.
I think I agree with everything Bridget said. I believe the question also is referred to what people are used to see. When the Nigerian movement started as a popular cinema, they had an audience that wanted this type of movie. As the time goes, they managed to sell the stories abroad, and it became a kind of joke for people living in the West to put an African movie and see some funny effects, laugh at it sometimes. But within that, that has improved, but people perception, that's a demonization of Africa remains. And it's really hard to change people, I don't know, people positions when it has been hardened with true history. The perception that we have of Africa is always that, oh, we need help. And that's the approach that we have, for example, in Africa, in the Cameroonian or French-speaking cinema, that we need technicians from Europe, otherwise it would be a waste of money. Maybe that had happened in the past. But the reality today, sorry, I quickly finish it. The reality today is African has got 4 or 5 generations not living in Africa. I'm proud to call myself an African filmmaker, not because I'm only born in Africa, because I'm Black, I'm part of the continent. It's knows through the different languages I speak. I've learned German, French, and English at school. I have learned a lot through the world. And when I've made that movie, my movie, The Eagle's Nest, that's what I wanted to do. I've used British pop song. The guy who wrote the music is a hard rock composer. Is the one who wrote the song is a white guy for North England. It's a colleague of mine that worked, because I went to Egypt, so I called friends and colleagues to participate into the effort of telling that story. I wanted just to change the conversation, to make people realize that it doesn't matter whether or not I'm Black or African, we can still tell a story and set the story in Africa about people. So that's what I hope we will go towards, and remove the expression African all the time, and we talk about stories and bring other culture into that to make sure that we are telling the story. That's what I was trying to do.
Ronaldo, go ahead.
Well,
I have a question. Based on my experience, I think, number one, film commissions can be of some help. I do not know if in each of your countries there is a film commission, even though I know about the bureaucratic implications of any kind of commission. I also know the political implications of any kind of commission. But that's a structure. The other structure that I think is helpful, film schools. I also know the difficulties in bringing qualified professors into a film school. I know the difficulties in bringing African professors into any school of film in Africa. Nevertheless, these are two, I think, based on my own experience, two possibilities of increasing and ameliorating the situation of African cinema. I remember working here in the office, a young lady from Colombia, and she attended NYU. And one of the questions that I had for her was very simple. Have you ever seen any Latin American film? And she's from Colombia. And she told me, I never did. When I was in school, all I got was European and American cinema. Well, this is something that in School of Cinema in Africa should not happen. Should not happen at all. With the limitations we might have, our students should be exposed to African cinema, whatever it is. And we should be professional enough to explain certain things. Commissions, of course, commissions can be very revolutionary or reactionary, but a commission is structured, and sometimes to have a structure is helpful. I don't know if you can talk about the different film commissions in your countries. I know that in the case of the UK, the situation is a little bit complicated because I don't think there is a film commission over there. But anyway, Olivier, you can.
No, there's a BFI. So, for example, for my next project, there's a BFI. They have different programs where you can then submit a script, and then if it's selected, then they will then make sure that you have a team around you, and then the movie is turned into the story is turned into a movie. And they also have different
Another structure that I forgot is that of film festivals. Bridget was indicating that African filmmakers don't see the work of other African filmmakers. I think, for example, you are here talking to us and you come from different places. This is something that in our festival, we quickly realized was important for African filmmakers to interact and understand what's going on in the continent, because it is not easy for them to do that. And a film festival is a place of gathering and intellectual and professional exchange. So we can have structures to work and push forward, but it is, it's for you to tell us about film commissions, schools of cinema, please.
Maybe I can talk a little bit about Namibia. So in Namibia, we have a film commission, which since 2010 started financing quite a bit of fictional content in our country. I mean, we had 6 short films at the African Diaspora Festival in 2012, which were all financed by the Film Commission. A lot of the feature films that now were made over the last 5 years also had funding from the Film Commission, including #Land of the Brave Film. So there has been, obviously it's still a political institution, it's a government institution, it operates with public funds, so there is certain policies in place that probably not too critical governmental content would be funded, but where they did support definitely a lot of the filmmaking in this country is with the fictional funding. So, and there was not real policing in terms of what the content may be or not. So Namibia on that end is definitely doing relatively well.
Film school in Namibia, please.
So we have a media arts technology section, which falls under the College of the Arts, which offers a diploma over 3 years in writing, directing, camera work. A lot of the students that go through that film school mostly want to end up with a job at the national broadcaster, so the television station here, because that's sort of like a secure income that they can bank on, essentially. At the same time, obviously, we're also a small nation, which I mentioned at the outset. So if we every year churn out 10 to 20 new film students, you're potentially creating more joblessness, essentially. It sounds horrific to say that, but it is a reality because there's only so many jobs that are available permanently. And the market itself is not necessarily big enough to allow so many different film production companies to compete for what's possible within the country. That's where the regional thinking or the continental thinking becomes so important.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I don't know if I should agree. Every single year, everywhere in the world, they have a lot of video student or film school student coming up with the idea of the hope to work in the industry. Only maybe 5% actually do it. That should not be a problem. People should carry on, should do what they want to do or what they wish to do if they want to become filmmakers. They should dream of becoming filmmakers and then let life decide. In the case of Cameroon, for example, the government doesn't support filmmakers. Most of the effort will come from the Goethe Institute, that will come from the French embassy, that will come from but the government doesn't really take the risk into the seven art. And really, it's a mistake because it's not only about becoming a film director. There's a lot of jobs that can be created in the industry, and that can generate. That really can help people that want to work for the government to create opportunities for others. In Cameroon, it's not the case. I don't remember the last time the government put the money towards a feature film. For example, when I went there, I've seen people don't realize I made this movie with £5,000. I don't know how much it is in your currency. To be where I am today, I'm really proud of what the kids in Cameroon have achieved. When I went to the university, I approached them to take part in the project. None of them have ever seen a slider in their life. So I have to give training on people how to push a slider. That's ridiculous. People can spend the time to do better things if you can provide them with at least the basic of the equipment. A slider can be made. You don't have to buy one. That can be made. The technique of doing indie film doesn't require a lot of money. It's about the results. Nobody sees what happens behind the camera. So that's why it's just the way we talk about film school. It's the way we spend time giving people a lot of big names and diplomas. I don't know. All of them are doctor on something. I don't know, doctor. They have so much degrees. But in terms of the practicality that is required and the creative need to make a movie, they don't have it. And most of the guys I work with, they've learned it on YouTube. And they've done a great job. They are not doctors or something, they learn on YouTube, and then we work together to create what I've done. If I had more money, I would have done better. The next time I go, I will have enough money to do a better film. A much better film. It wasn't that easy. It's not that bad.
Well, to answer Rinaldo's question, I'd like to first answer the first question. The first question, I'd like to emphasize on this. There is no such thing as an African cinema, because Africa is not one country, it's a continent of 54 countries, and every country has its own culture and its own industry, its own background, and its own storytelling structure. And so that makes it 54 different industries or film communities. So, for example, there is a variety in African storytellers, and when some people from outside try to define African filmmaking, they try to say that it's the one continent, it's the one film community, or it's one film industry, which is wrong for me. For me, talking about the point of view of a Rwandan film industry or film community, is in terms of quantity, we are trying to make as many films as possible because we are trying to tell as many stories as possible. And in terms of quality, we are trying to make as good films as possible. Yeah. And for Ronaldo's question, we have no film commission in Rwanda. We have a film office. It's a British entity from Rwanda Development Board, which is somehow a film tourism entity, trying to sell Rwanda as a film destination, film shooting destination. And we have Rwandan Film Federation, which is like a filmmakers coalition trying to lobby the government to understand the filmmaking in our country. Actually, we don't know even, we are not even sure if the country understands or the government understands if there is filmmaking in our country. Yeah, that's my answer. And film schools, we have some media schools, which is somehow technical schools, and they are doing good because they are contributing to the development of the industry, because they are editors and camera operators coming out of these schools. And I'm not sure if there is such thing as a film school in my country. We all learn filmmaking from the street. That's where it comes from. Yeah.
It's already 3:21 EST, so we have another maybe 10 minutes before we close. And it was supposed to be an hour. We're going an hour and a half. It's so fascinating. We don't want to stop. There's one question that came from the audience regarding audiences. Do Africans on the continent get to see any of these remarkable films?
I think it is in terms, okay, my distributor is based in the US, in Detroit. The movie is available for the North American market, and then it's on Prime Video for people who have a membership. But the question I laughed earlier on because it makes sense. Most of the time we make a movie, the distribution within the continent, I think Dr. Neto was earlier, it doesn't exist. The big corporation or the big production company have created, for example, I will take the Cameroon for example. Canal Plus has got, there's no cinema because it's been closed. The government doesn't support the industry, therefore that doesn't think that it's necessary to have a cinema. There's no cinema in Cameroon. But what exists is the places, the buildings that are owned by Canal Plus, they can then stream in form of cinema program that are part of the package that generates extra income. Like it's just like cheap distribution, but a big revenue in the long term. But when you are in African filmmaker, you cannot compete. You cannot compete against that because you can't use the infrastructure. So it becomes hard. In terms of my movie, the only way for me to allow the Cameroonian to see my movie would be to go through what actually exists, unless I do what Ben Usman did in the past. You take the van, I really plan to do it next year. You take your movie and you just go across Africa and you allow people to see the movie. I thought about that. That might be a way of making people see the movie, like a moving cinema van or something, to allow people that in remote places to see movie and be inspired. I thought about it, but it doesn't really exist in terms of my movie. That's the only way to see it, and I really would like to do something different.
Did you ask Bridget the question about film school and film commission in South Africa? I know there is a film commission in South Africa, right? Bridget?
So obviously the industry in South Africa is extremely developed, and there are many, many film schools. I mean, there's AFDA, which is the main one, but all the universities have film departments, there's sort of technicons. So there's at least I mean, I don't quote me, but at least I'm sure 15 to 20 places where you can go and study film or television or media in South Africa. And then we've got, as you know, a number of different funding instruments from the National Film and Video Foundation, the tax rebates. We've got a funding in KZN, which is the KZN Film Commission, that gives money if you want to shoot in that part of the country. In Eastern Cape, there's also funding. And then there's, then there's kind of other, the IDC, which is primarily a bank which supports film. So in terms of film schools, definitely that's a very important part in sort of every year releasing, the next generation of filmmakers. So I think, it's a really important part of the South African industry to have these constantly young people who are entering the industry. And are they working? It seems so. It seems that most of the people are working, so somehow the industry is absorbing them. And obviously, this is a kind of really critical time, particularly in South Africa, where people like Netflix, and there are these different players that are coming into the space. And I think what that's done is that it's kind of created an industry where, on the good side, it's created an industry which is quite competitive. So everybody is trying everyone has elevated in a way their game, their skills, their way of thinking, to ensure that hopefully they'll get a Netflix commission or be able to, be able to kind of move their career forward. In terms of festivals, we've kind of, the Durban Film Mart is a pitching forum, a financing forum, but also it shows films. And then there's Encounters, which is a documentary film festival. Unfortunately, the festivals in Cape Town no longer exist. There's one or two other smaller festivals. I think there was a festival, there was a African Film Festival also that was held in Johannesburg last week, which is primarily screening African films. So that's kind of a film commission in Johannesburg. Is there a film commission? No, there isn't really a film. There's the Gauteng Film Commission, which is primarily services. Yes, there is. In every city and every kind of region, there's a film commission, which basically acts almost as a service. They provide services which supports people who want to make films here. And they've also started giving money. So the Gauteng Film Commission has recently funded a short film that I was making. So it's really, all these possibilities, the kind of, it creates an industry that is quite sort of evolved, and there's a lot going on, and there's different pockets of money. Of course, it's never enough, and filmmakers are always complaining. But I think as a in terms of, even compared to Namibia, I think the Namibia Film Commission has enormously helped and changed the Namibian film industry. Without them, the films that, like Tim's film or any other film would not be made. So the government is critical, especially at the beginning of an industry, in terms of just creating a kind of, the skills, the energy, the economic viability, all of these different elements, I think is really, really important. So if the Namibia Film Commission didn't exist, most of the Namibian filmmakers wouldn't be able to survive or make films. So it has been really critical, I think, in allowing films to be made. And so, so South Africa is clearly at a different level. I think at the highest level, I think 20 to 30 feature films were being made a year when we were at the highest level of production. Obviously, COVID has changed that quite dramatically. But when everything is working the way it should be, then the industry is able to produce anything from 30 to 50 films a year, local films, not service productions.
Diera, you had a question? From the
No, no, I think that question was answered. So unless, I want to invite anybody to say a last word before we end this conversation, if anybody wants to say anything.
Yes, I want to say thank you for the opportunity to share the space with everybody else. I think we enjoy, we've learned a lot. And then especially for the future of African as a continent, African film, I think we need more of those conversations. I took the liberty today of Google it, I'll go on YouTube. I couldn't find more than 10. So it will be a good opportunity for, if we can keep repeating this regularly, people will learn a lot. And it will allow ourselves to benefit, to share what we already know, and also to gain insight into what's happening somewhere elsewhere.
Absolutely.
I would like to say something. Thank you very much, because technology is helping us to have you here. Since from the beginning we said it, we are not a corporate film festival. We don't get monies from the corporations. That's why I think, and I am not the only one thinking that way, that's why our programming is so diverse, and some people call it hardcore. I remember Diara and I were attending some sort of convention, and someone approached us and indicated that we were, when it comes to African cinema, we were hardcore. I never understood what the person meant, but this is the terminology that was used. So we are very happy that all the trouble and tribulations we have faced for 29 years to put this event together helped us to reach out to people like you, to people like Lerato. We made Lerato some years ago at the Cannes Film Festival. So I think we have become very sensitive to the fact that, as Professor Alibadi, I found the book, the title is Manufacturing Hate, How Africa Was Demonized in Western Media. Before he published this book, my thesis at the university was built on that. How can we put our image out there? I am a foreign language professor, so through languages and literature, I did that in the classroom. Then I moved to a film festival and all that. But I am very happy to have this opportunity to talk to you and have people here in New York City and in other cities to be exposed to the work you do, to the situation in Africa, to the ups and downs of an industry that is important, to the differentiation of the different African countries. Because as it was indicated earlier, Africa is a continent, Africa is not a country. And I remember when I walked the first time in a classroom and how the students didn't have that difference clearly in their heads. So it is a very complicated job, because we cannot forget Hollywood. And Hollywood is, puts a lot of pressure on people. They don't want to share the market. This is the reality. They want to have the market all for them. And when Tim, you were talking about the hero, the superhero situation, I must tell you, brother, this superhero thing is not over here. We are very much interested in superhero. I don't know what that is, if it is part of the American culture, if it is part of our tribulations in the world. I don't know what that is. But anyway, again, thank you. I hope to see you again. I hope to see you maybe in Durban, maybe in Fespaco. I hope this pandemic is through one day, so we can have physical interaction and enjoy ourselves. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Yes. I'd like to add something. I'd like to invite everyone who likes African cinema to explore and to dig deeper and see every one of 54 countries is doing, because the Rwandan cinema is different from Tunisian cinema, and we are on the same continent. And South African cinema is different from Moroccan cinema, and Namibian cinema is different from Algerian cinema, and Congolese cinema is different from Ethiopian cinema, and we are from the same continent. I would like to invite the audience of the African cinema to explore individually every country's cinema. And thank you for hosting us today, and I hope to see you soon.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
Have a good evening. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.